Calling Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. I must respond to the previous contributor who said something like Labor had 9 long years to do something about child poverty. Well, Working for Families raised over 100,000 children out of child poverty. The leader of the National Party, I think the finance spokesman at the time, John Key, called it communism by stealth, and National voted against it. And of course, Labor's policy at the last election would have raised over 50,000 more children out of poverty. Far more significant than any aspect of this legislation. But let's Part 3 in particular, because Part 3 deals with the family tax credit and the thresholds. And by any measure, the increases that are available to people under Part 3 just don't touch the sides. 4,000 families. 4,000 families. So what are we talking? 8,000, maybe 10,000 children at the most will be entitled to an extra $12 a week, and that's at a cost to the government of $1.8 million annually. Now, this is a government that's spending $26 million on a flag referendum that gave $30 million to a foreign corporate.
Come back. And
their response in Part 3 of this legislation is to spend $1.8 million annually. So it'd take at least 13 years for this measure to get onto a par with a flag referendum.
Come back.
And that is not an adequate response to child poverty, and it is rich for a member of the government benches to get up and say that they are doing more than other parties have done when we have been in government, when that party in opposition railed against measures that had a far more significant impact on child poverty and poverty in general than what this legislation does. Look, the $12.50 inflation is essentially the increase of $12.50 that a handful of families are going to be entitled to under Part 3 is essentially an inflation adjustment. It is something that probably ought to be just built in to the system anyway. It's not an increase in real terms. It's helping a handful of families catch up with some of the increases in the cost of living. As I say, it certainly, well, it won't touch the sides. The difference that this will make is utterly negligible. And I would be ashamed, if I was one of the National Party members, I would be ashamed to get up and speak in favour of these changes in the way that they have done, because in real terms, the difference that people are going to experience is utterly negligible. At best, you could say it's assisting families to catch up with the cost of living over the last few years. So, of course, any change in the right direction is worth supporting. But let's be honest about what this really is. The minimum family tax credit is highlighted with these changes, and of course one of the big problems with the minimum family tax credit is that there are points where it has a nearly 100% effective marginal tax rate. And I've said this before about other legislation relating to these issues. I would have thought the National Party would have wanted to do more about marginal tax rates, especially for people on the lowest incomes, especially for people who are trying to transition from benefit into work or are trying to make work a larger proportion of the income that they receive. And the National Party rails against effective marginal tax rates for rich people, but when it comes to these people, the people who are trying to scrape by on the very least, and in particular families, people who are trying to raise children on the very least, this government shows again utter inaction.
Members, just to mention that the sound seems to be resolved now, so thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.